I'm Jennies Edwards, author of To MILELE, and we'll be reading chapter 13. We left chapter 12 with a reintroduction to the Watcher and what sorts of things he's up to, as well as we witnessed a very human side of Hope once again when she had a meltdown with Agios about the world conditions, wondering why Prince Adani was still away, when he would return, when would he deliver them, sort of thing. And also we had a tour of the grounds of the compound as Hope walked around it. And also we saw more of the outside of the compound from the vantage of the high point where Agios was with Hope. Also, we were introduced to a special little character named Baby Moses, who was rescued from the Atlantic, and Hope has pretty much taken him under her wings. And we also were given some indication that children under a certain age all had Eden 2 DNA. All right, let's jump into chapter 13. And we are in Israel. Your sister will come, Keiko Bays declared confidently with a pleased look in Nathan's direction. Will she indeed? Mendex Nebian questioned. Doubt and derision laced his tone. Do you really believe she's the answer? His question was directed at Keiko, but his look pinned Nathan. Nathan was sitting on one of two luxury sofas in Keiko's private quarters at the Tel Aviv hotel. They were debriefing after a Council of Nations mid-morning session. As much as the regular sessions mandated by Keiko were necessary to govern and keep abreast of world issues, Nathan found it increasingly conflicting each time he attended. Yet, what could be done? Although each country still had sovereign rule over domestic affairs, the slow recovery from post-asteroid disasters and the ever-looming mist required the governance of the Council of Nations over global affairs. Absolutely, Keiko replied. His confidence was palpable, and he seemed at odds with a very his confidence seemed at odds with a very oppressive presence that permeated the room. Nathan wasn't sure who exuded the darkness more, Tsabe, who was standing about 5 meters away near the living room's arched entrance, or Mendex, who occupied the second sofa on the other side of an ornate cocktail table. Keiko sat erect in a throne-like armchair, reviewing an open folder held out before him. For some time now, Nathan had known deep down that he would have to break ties with the two of them. Or rather, the three of them, if he were to include Keiko's other powerful inner circle supporter, Scarlet Babylon. Their agenda to ultimately bring the world under full control of the Weltschieß was in direct opposition to the loyals' belief that one day Prince Adani would return and restore all to order under his rule. Supporters of the Weltschieß denounced any thought of Prince Adani and the Sky Kingdom. But many still supported the idea of the sovereign emperor and the realm of the sovereign Jennies. Though, of course, there were different views as to who the sovereign emperor really was. Absolutely she will, Keiko repeated. She is the key, is she not, Nathan? The world will listen to the island princess, the maiden of the mist. He turned to Mendex. They believe she will break through the patch and discover the answers within. If she endorses me, world pressure will force the rest of the council to bow to our wishes. That may be, Mendex responded gravely, but we should have a backup plan. Keiko, with an annoyed look, shut the folder and slapped his hand against its dark leather surface. Mendex, with all due respect, she will come, and it will work. He dropped the folder on the cocktail table. Nathan finally found courage to press the issue bothering him. Sir, why do you believe Hope's venture into the mist patch holds the answer? Good question, Keiko said, looking at him with a sort of condescending affection. The other two were not so generous. Tesabe's grunt could be heard across the room, and Mendex just stared at Nathan stonily. Keiko stood, rolled his shoulders back, and smoothed his tie. His suit jacket lay neatly on one side of the chair's upholstered back. It has been foretold. The bride will rule and reign with the prince. The prince will become king of the universe. Now we see as if through a mist, but one day the mist will disappear and all will be revealed. Nathan was mystified. Keiko, who hated any mention of Prince Adani, had quoted from the Truth Tome. The bride? Nathan questioned hesitantly. With a strange gleam in his eyes, Keiko answered, Yes, your sister, Hope Kala Kanisa. We know who she is. The bride, didn't you know? Even her middle name means that in Hebrew. He looked pleased with himself. She will enter the dimension beyond the mist patch and bring us its secrets. The loyals think she belongs to them, that she and they will reign with the dead prince. But she will become ours, Mendex stated emphatically. His eyes were dark with a sadistic gleam. Tesabe grunted. Indeed she will, Keiko agreed. He resumed his seat, crossing one knee over the other. His confidence was now insufferable. A mixture of anger and dread welled up in Nathan. He forced himself to mask his feelings and asked, And the prince who will be king? The slow smile that etched Keiko's face gave Nathan the expected, unsettling answer. Nevertheless, Mendex's prideful, smug response still sent chills down Nathan's spine. You sit before him, Nathaniel David Kanisa. You assist the man who will one day have not only the power of this world in his hand, but that of the entire universe. Unbeckoned fear followed the chills, filling Nathan's mind. He was also horrified at their future plans for his sister. They spoke with boldness as if Hope had no choice. A knock sounded at the entrance door directly across from the living room archway. Tesabe reached the door in 3 big steps and opened it. Envoy Bays, security said from the doorway. Ms. Babylon has arrived, sir. Send her in, Keiko said. Both he and Mendex stood up expectantly, facing the entrance. Nathan followed suit. Tesabe moved to the side of the door. Nathan had only seen Scarlet Babylon from a distance a few times. Her last name is spelled Babilon, but you might get the implications from the actual name. Nathan had only seen Scarlet Babylon from a distance a few times. If Keiko Bays was the most powerful man in the world, she was the most powerful woman. She'd garnered the attention of the world with her beauty, her charisma, and dogmatic worldviews. Like Keiko, she also strongly believed that humanity controlled its own destiny. Wealth, fame, and power were her taglines. She was majority owner of a vast oil corporation left by her deceased father, who was brother-in-law to Mendex Nabian. Besides all that, the moment she entered the room, Nathan was able to confirm one of the most dangerous things about her seduction. She looked only briefly at the other 2 men before pinning Nathan with her violet stare. Glossy auburn hair flowed effortlessly over one shoulder, with the tips resting just above her bosom. Her hair and eye colors were unusual for her natural tan skin, a result of her multiracial black background. Much about her voluptuous figure was revealed in a curve-hugging black dress that hung just above her knees. Very shapely legs followed, with feet encased in black stilettos. Rouge lips smiled at him, but the seduction that captivated most men had the opposite effect on Nathan. He was repulsed, and she also made him very nervous. "Hello, uncle," she said, greeting Mandex. "Keiko, what have we here? It's your very elusive assistant." She sauntered into the room, her gaze still on Nathan. Very nice looking, too. Her perfume stirred Nathan's senses. It wasn't strong, but along with her sultry voice, it was enough to increase his nervousness. This woman was way out of his league, and he wanted nothing to do with her. Eden 2. Thoughts of baby Moses filtered into Hope's mind as she continued her long trek into the mist patch. She'd been traveling with her little security team for over an hour. So far, the trip had been uneventful, but she was growing tired. She was apprehensive about the child's fate. Agios had given her no assurances other than to say that whatever Governor Peter, Dr. Mark, and Colonel Davenport agreed on would be the right decision. Sometimes Agios was so frustrating. Hope knew only a word from him would settle the decision. She stumbled a little over uneven terrain, and the men paused, waiting. She smiled reassuringly, then unfastened the water bottle from its secure place at her waist. "I'll just have a drink and rest a bit," she told her security team. Immediately, one dislodged a rolled blanket from his back and efficiently shook it open, laying it on the ground. Hope sat, feeling grateful. "Thanks," she said, smiling up at them. After circling around a little beyond her, scoping out the area, the men sat down. They sat on either side of her, behind and before, 4 in all, like aliens in their protective helmets and suits. "It might only take one more trip after this one, Miss Kanisa," the man on her immediate right assured her. "I hope so." Bracing back on her hands, she stretched out a kink in her back, and then looked as far as the fog light allowed. "It's the endless nothingness that gets to me," she continued. "Yet I feel as if something is waiting." The one on her left responded hesitantly. "The barrier, you mean, ma'am?" "No, something more. I can't explain it." She could feel their curious gazes. The one on her right spoke again. "Maybe you're sensing what's beyond it. That's the hope, that you're able to go beyond it." She thought, alone. Funny, they shielded her all this way, but no one seemed to count the potential cost that if she could go through, she would be doing so alone. Shaking herself mentally, Hope concluded, "No, they do care." She knew they cared. We're back to Israel. The distinct impression that someone was watching him had been with Nathan since he had entered the hotel dining room for his evening meal. He usually ate alone. Aside from state or political dinners, Keiko Bays usually took his meals in his private quarters. As executive assistant to the world envoy and potential world chancellor, consorting with lesser VPIs wasn't strictly forbidden, but outside of professional purposes was frowned upon. It was a lonely existence for Nathan. However, he'd welcomed the loneliness in exchange for assisting the most powerful man on earth. Hope was the outgoing twin. He was the loner, an introvert with a fixed purpose of mind and heart. That was before he knew the cost, knew the ultimate plan of his employer, and before the conflict with his loyalties. Perhaps his earlier encounter with Scarlet Babylon had set him on edge. Shortly after her arrival, he'd been sent out of the room, but his brief time in her presence was enough to confirm rumors of her avid flirtatiousness. Everything she did and said revealed an extremely liberal woman who knew no bounds to satisfy her appetite for pleasure. Nathan shoved thoughts of her from his mind. After dabbing his mouth with a cloth napkin, he slowly perused the grand dining room. Several other political VIPs graced the elaborately dressed tables. He received nods here and there, but was never approached. After all, his security had entered the room while theirs remained outside. Tonight, he focused on his security, a man and a woman, trying to discern what it was about them that made him feel uneasy. He didn't always pay attention to his security detail, but there was something familiar about the woman. Suddenly, he understood that she was the reason for his unease. She was the one who'd given him the message. Also, his security rarely made eye contact with him, but she was looking directly at him from across the room. Returning her look, Nathan felt an immediate connection. After Scarlet Babylon, this woman was a breath of fresh air, so that inexplicably his mind felt cleansed at the sight of her. A brief smile touched her lips, then she broke eye contact, maintaining a dutiful stance with not a hint of unprofessionalism. Dark hair tightly pulled back, clear brown skin, about 5 feet 6 inches, and medium build. She wore a dark pantsuit and white-collared blouse with feet firmly planted in small, black, low-heeled shoes. He continued staring at her for a moment, but she kept her eyes averted. Finally, he gave up. Before he finished his meal, he must have looked at her 100 times, but except for their initial connection, not once did she reciprocate. There had been something to that connection, Nathan felt, but he wasn't sure what. We're back to Eden 2. Hope's feet felt leaden. She was tired. The red flag marker had been pulled up from her previous stopping point maybe half an hour ago. "Would you like to stop?" the security on her right asked, his voice filled with concern. She had been stumbling. Would she be able to continue much longer? "Just a few minutes more," she breathed. The air was thick and had become like a heavy weight. She considered using her breathing apparatus, which she'd never had cause to use on the way in before. They only needed to monitor her status during the inward trips, so it was protocol to have one available for the return trips or for emergencies. But now, maybe they should start back and she could use it, just for a moment of easy breathing. She thought of baby Moses. Only a moment of easy breathing. Hope stopped. The weight had suddenly lifted. Sounds erupted around her. She looked behind. The men had fallen backwards, flat on their backs. As they tried to right themselves and position their weapons, Hope looked forward. Then she noticed it. A faint glow coming from somewhere at her neck. Heat radiated from the same spot. What was it? She looked down and pulled the gold chain around her neck. It was her lamb pendant, glowing like a small nightlight. She looked around, noticing nothing different. The mist still surrounded, deep and thick, misshapen with the erratic motion of the men's fog lights. Her modified light strapped around her waist remained still, its beam straight and sure. Hope didn't see the difference. She felt it. Mystified, she let the pendant fall outside her clothing. An unknown assurance filled her, then determination. She barely heard the collective gasps of protest from her companions as she took a step forward. Whatever had held them back was letting her through. Unexpectedly, she could hear the roar of the cascading water like the island's waterfall, but it was a much fuller, richer volume. Something gave way and she stepped into space. Then the blood rushed from her head and darkness flooded her sight. Israel. Nathan waited outside his room as the male security did the usual checks. The female, looking very alert, less than 2 meters from him, was scanning the long hallway and scanning him. He breathed a sigh of relief when the male security exited and nodded politely. "All clear, Mr. Kanisa," he said, tight-lipped. He briefly eyed his female counterpart, then turned to go. She remained. Puzzled, Nathan gave her a quick nod before entering the room. Before he could close the door, she slipped in and closed it for him, then stood with her back up against it. Before he could protest, she spoke, her voice slightly heightened in an almost musical tone. "Is there anything else we may offer you, Mr. Kanisa?" She had a hint of Israeli accent and something else. Her gaze locked on his, big brown eyes, heart-shaped face with high cheekbones. He was momentarily captivated by her beauty. She continued, "Compliments of Envoy Bays for your hard work, and perhaps to ease your loneliness away from your family." Nathan looked at the door, then at her, befuddled. She maintained a steady stare. Suddenly, he understood, and heat quickly crawled up his neck. He found himself stuttering, stepping backwards away from her. No, I have all I need. Thank you." It wasn't what he'd expected at all. It was from her that he'd received the note. Was she not with the underground Israeli loyals? As he continued backing away, she followed him. Her gaze continued to hold his, clear and innocence. Pseudo-innocence, surely. Had he misunderstood? "Envoy Bays is very consistent that you be comforted, be compensated," she continued. A smile touched her full lips. "Your utmost pleasure is mine." No, he hadn't misunderstood. He resisted the temptation pulling at him. Indeed, he was lonely, and the years had been piling up, but he couldn't take what she offered. He paused, then made a move to go around her toward the door. Her next action stopped him. She held out a small piece of paper. He looked down at it, remembering the one she'd given him before. It read, "My loyalty to Prince Adani transcends all." He looked at her. She mouthed the word, "bugs," before continuing the charade. "Are you sure you would not wish for my presence for the night? Am I not pleasing to you, sir?" She winked at him. A deep sigh of relief escaped. Nathan looked around the room, feeling as if they were being watched, but he managed to play the game. Well, perhaps. You do find me pleasing?" she said, helping him out with the charade, now grinning. As a matter of fact, yes. Maybe you could stay for a while." Now he faced her fully, feeling very self-conscious. Still grinning and completely at ease in her role, she said, "My name is Faith." New scene, Eden 2. After hearing the first 3 blasts of a foghorn just over an hour ago indicating health concerns, Ruth and the medical team had started preparing. The last series of blasts had sounded 15 minutes ago. 2 blasts would have meant serious injury, 1 life-threatening danger. When the men finally appeared out of the mist patch, Ruth felt as if her heart was in her throat. They were moving quickly while carrying Hope on a stretcher they'd never had cause to unroll before. One of the men immediately started updating Dr. Mark as he and his team hurried toward the military tents, holding their load firmly, carefully. Hope lay motionless, her body wrapped in a blanket with a breathing apparatus over her face. She was cocooned between the poled walls of the stretcher as if she lay in a coffin. Ruth shoved the morbid thought from her mind as Hope was transferred to the gurney. One of the men helped Ruth remove the breathing apparatus, while the others hovered uncertainly, still in their full gear. Even beneath her golden brown skin, Hope looked pale, lashes dark against her cheek. "We'll look after her. She'll be okay," Ruth assured the men. They nodded, still looking uncertain, then began removing their helmets as they walked away. Dr. Mark immediately put an oxygen mask on Hope, and Ruth started assessing her vital signs. 2 other medical personnel were close by preparing for blood samples and other tests. Not a stir from Hope. Approximately 30 minutes later, Ruth was fretful, standing back from Hope's gurney, watching, puzzled. The decision had been made to keep Hope in the military tent so as not to alarm the general Eden 2 population. Both the IV and the oxygen mask, which had allowed replenishing fluids and oxygen to flow into Hope's body, had been disconnected. Her vital signs were normal and her color much improved. Oddly enough, she appeared to simply be sleeping. Dr. Mark stroked his chin, looked at Ruth, then at Dr. Misra, who'd since arrived, drew to the seriousness of the situation. Earlier, Governor Peter and Colonel Davenport had also made their appearances, were just as mystified, then had left to closet themselves with the man who'd been with Hope. The fact that she'd made it through the invisible wall was huge. However, the pressing unanswered question was, if she continued all the way through the barrier, would she be able to return? "This is all very perplexing," Dr. Mark said. He rehashed the information as if trying to force hidden answers from it. It was as if they'd hit a wall. Yet she went through. For a short moment they couldn't see her, then she stepped back and fainted. "There doesn't seem to be any reason for her not waking," Ruth had stated the obvious, needing to say the words. "Blood work," Dr. Misra said, nodding, deep in thought. "Vitals, brain waves," Dr. Mark continued. "All normal," Dr. Misra said, shaking her head slowly. "We'll just have to keep waiting. I'm sure she'll wake soon." Dr. Mark went to sit on one of several metal chairs a short distance from the gurney. Dr. Misra gave Ruth's arm an encouraging pat, then went to join Dr. Mark. Ruth remained standing beside the gurney, willing Hope to wake up. And yet, they should have known. When he came, it was as if all their questions and fears became vapor. As he moved past each one, his very presence brought comfort and reassurance. With no words, just a look, a smile, a touch. When he reached the gurney, he looked at Ruth tenderly. "Why do you worry so? I would have come earlier had you asked." Ruth was at loss for words. Of course. Triune connect. The way you communicated with the sovereign, the way to communicate with the sovereigns. Why has she not thought of it? Agios moved closer to the gurney, his bearing, his look, filled with tenderness as he looked down at Hope. He gently smoothed the disheveled ringlets back from her forehead before resting his hand just above her brows. He removed his hand, then looked over at Ruth and said, "She's only resting." Then he turned and lowered his head just above Hope's. He pursed his lips and gently blew into her face, then straightened. Relief coursed through Ruth as the corners of Hope's mouth lifted like a smile. Hope's eyelids fluttered, then opened slowly as if from a long, deep sleep. She looked at Agios and her smile widened. What took you so long? Hope breathed, her voice soft and filled with wonder. That's the end of chapter 13. I hope you join me next time for chapter 14. Take care.